Hi, and welcome to this episode of Rights for Women. My name is Rae Cairns. I'm a crime writer and one of the guest hosts for the year. And it's my absolute pleasure to be speaking with debut author Kerryn Mayne about her crime novel, Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder. Kerryn, welcome to the Convo Couch.
Thank you so much for having me, Rae. I'm very excited to talk about this book and talk about it to you because I loved your book, The Good Mother.
Thank you. That's very kind. Now, today's release date. Congratulations.
Yes,
How are you feeling?
Oh, still having a few pinch me moments, and I've had a few messages come through, and forgive me anybody that hasn't heard back from me yet, because I had to do school drop off, I had to put some washing on, and now I'm sitting down. Yeah, a couple of babies that demand to be fed. Apparently, release date means nothing to the under 5 set. So it's very exciting. And I'll be off to meet a friend at a bookshop to see them in real life on launch day and have a champagne shortly. It's a good day. Yeah. And then home in time for school pickup.
Of course. The life of a working mum, hey?
Yes.
But congratulations.
Thank you.
I read Lenny Marks over the weekend, and I have to say it's been one of my favourite reads so far this year, honestly. It's beautiful, funny, heart-wrenching and suspenseful. It's got characters that are gorgeously flawed that you can't help but love. And it's also been described as Oliphant meets the girl on the train, which I think sums it up quite well.
I love these titles. Like, they make me, like, Eleanor Oliphant is one of my favourite books. So maybe that's why there's a little bit of a homage to her in there. But it's so lovely to hear nice words about my book.
But I think they're accurate. That description is very accurate. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Of course. Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder is about a school teacher, Lenny Marks. She's our protagonist. She is living in the Dandenongs, which is in the very outer suburbs of Melbourne. For those who don't know, it's very pretty, picturesque, hilly, ferns and palms. More ferns, a bit rainforesty. But she is living a very scheduled life, a very routine life, and is very happy with that. She doesn't intend to change anything. Unfortunately for her, life has other plans. So she gets a letter from the parole board letting her know her stepfather's being paroled, and she can't for the life of her work out why she would need to know that. She hasn't seen him for 20. But that triggers a series of events and changes in Lenny's life, and she starts to remember a whole lot of what has gone on as opposed to what she thinks has gone on for all these years. So I'll leave it there, because otherwise it's very hard to describe a book.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Yeah, I know, without going too far into it. But yeah, Lenny, it's a story about Lenny Marks. So it has a crime in it, but it's more than anything. I wanted to tell Lenny's story. So that was my aim in this one.
And it's funny how she can't remember adds so much tension on every page as you're reading it, because you just know something is coming.
And she's not sure either. So she was quite fun to write in that respect, because what she believes and what's actually happened poles apart. But of course, as you have to do to any character to make a book readable, as it turns out, you do horrible things to them. So poor Lenny.
The more you like them, the nastier you are, right?
I know. Yeah, you've really got to give them that journey, don't you? Need a character arc, otherwise nobody wants to read about it. Sorry, Lenny Marks.
So what sparked the idea for the story initially?
So it's hard because you think back and it's hard to know where it all started from. Lenny Marks came to me as a character, first of all, because I wanted to write something with somebody that was a bit quirky and that had something terrible happen to them in their life, and then they just gone and got on with it. So they just picked up, kept going, and many years later, there's so many people out there in the world that are survivors or victims or witnesses of horrible things, that it's touched so many people, and then they just have to get on with it, because what other choice do you have? So I really wanted to do a story about after the crime, and Lenny came to me with many of her quirks. Some of them developed over time, and once I started writing about it, and the book certainly looks a lot different, as most books do, than when I started with it, but it was all a progression of learning about her and where I wanted her to go and that sort of thing. But yeah, started writing about her, and this story just spilled out.
So it was definitely character first.
Character first for this one, yes.
Did you know it was going to be crime?
Yeah, I think so. So my background, I'm a police officer. So I've been a detective been in the police force for about 16 years. I was a detective for about 7 of them, and now I'm a sergeant in a very comfortable office, although at the moment I am on parental leave, so I'm not in any office. I'm being ruled by 4 small children at the moment. I've gone off with the fairies. Where did I go? Oh, character first. Oh, so crime in it. Because of my background, I think what occurred to me when I was writing. So I wrote back in high school and then I put it down. So I hadn't written for years. And then we had the glorious author Sally Hepworth come along to one of our book clubs, and she asked if there's 3 detectives in our book club, and she said, can I send you guys my unpublished book, which went on to be The Mother-in-Law, because I'd love to just get your take on whether or not it's accurate. Is this the way things could happen? Because I think it was her first book that was crime, and it was her first book that was based in Melbourne. Yes. And that's when I realised I have this knowledge that not everybody has, because you're not along at work and you think, oh, everybody knows who delivers a death message and everybody knows what happens when your car gets broken into, the process from there, because it's everything. Turns out, apparently, thankfully, most people don't know those processes, which is good, because it means hopefully not everybody's car gets broken into or you get horrible knocks on the door from the police. But I knew, and I went all of a sudden, okay, well, then I've got this knowledge that I can put into writing. I did first make a police procedural with this.
That was one of my questions for you. Because it's a kind of an unusual decision as a police detective, not unusual, a surprising decision is a better way to frame it, that the police are very much on the periphery of this story.
Yes. In fact, they're probably not even that smart, which probably is a giveaway potentially with the title, but I certainly wanted to make the police not an integral part of the story. Yeah, but my first book, which is in the depths of this computer somewhere, is a police procedural. Okay. And it's written about a female detective in the Melbourne suburb. So essentially I wrote a story about myself, but didn't think I was writing a story about myself, but bogged it down in a whole lot of procedure and I'll write a book the way things really happen.
Paperwork.
I won't sensationalize this. So there's a hell of a lot of paperwork in my book. It didn't take off. Nobody wants to read about paperwork and coffee runs. Yeah, I know. Who would have thought? So I shelved that, and that's where Lenny came from, because I'm like, what do I like to read about? I love your characters in books that are a little bit more quirky and have that are flawed, and they're not. Lenny's still process driven and she still loves a routine, which is a lot like me. There's actually a few too many of Lenny's traits in me. But
really, that was one of my questions for you. Is she inspired by yourself or somebody else in your life? Because she's very unique. She's a very unique character.
Yeah, so she's not solely me. She's not solely anyone, but yeah, there's a lot of little things in there. And I'm sure all authors have done this. You just pinch a little something from here and shake it all together and you hope it turns out to be somebody great. And look, I don't know that Lenny Marks and I would get along, but I love her.
Yeah, I want her over for dinner.
Oh, do you? Yes. She wouldn't come, to be
honest. I know. I'd have to get Ned to drag her or something.
Have to trick her somehow into thinking something else is going on, or get her foster mum on side, and that would probably get her over. But yeah, so it always was going to contain crime, but it very much changed from when I first sat down and started writing to being all crime and police procedural to being crime in the sort of periphery. Or, as I heard Holly Throsby describe her book Clark, she said it's crime adjacent, and I love that description.
That's actually a very apt description for the book.
Not bad, isn't it?
It's more about after the crime, isn't it, this book?
Yeah.
And it's about how you live after a pretty significant event, traumatic event in your life.
Yeah. Quirky, crime adjacent, whatever you want to go with. But yeah, it was always going to be about crime. And yeah, that's where we went.
So you said before that she didn't arrive fully formed, but she had quirks. So did she change a lot in the writing of the manuscript, or it was more what happened to her changed?
Yeah, probably more what happened to her and the reasons they happened to her. So she was always going to be very process driven, very much happier in the school term than she was when she was on school holiday break, because she didn't really know what to do with herself. She always wanted to get around on her bicycle, even though I'm sure anybody that lives in that area up in Belgrade, public transport's probably not really the best way to get around. So she's got her bike, so she gets around on her bike. Always wanted her to have that real affinity with pop culture, but not knowing it. Like, she loves Friends, but it's not because it was popular. It was because something about it warmed to her. And Friends, the TV show, I should say, not Friends in general. Like, it's
you actually, so you weave Friends through the story, and you also weave the Hobbit through the story.
And the Hobbit. So yeah, and the Hobbit I love is so that specifically the book, though, not the movies, because whatever they did with the movies, and I'm sure they've made enough money to not worry about my opinion on these things. But it's not like the Hobbit movies, but I love the book. And yeah, and that was all part of the Dandenong setting as well, because you're a little bit Middle Earthy up
Oh,
there.
yes. I
Yeah.
hadn't put that together. Okay. Because I was going to ask why the Dandenongs, and now I know. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a little bit of a character arc with your Bilbo and your Lenny, where these adventures, he wants to stay home. Adventure comes to his door. Likewise with Lenny, and then off they go on these journeys. And then I think the subheading or the sort of alternative title is There and Back Again with the Hobbit, or There and Back.
Okay.
Or I think that's woven into the story somewhere. If anybody is a mad Hobbit Lord of the Rings fan listening to this, they'll be really annoyed I don't know that, because people are I follow a lot of Lord of the Rings and Hobbit pages now on social media, and people are really intense about it. So I wouldn't want to get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's There and Back Again. And that kind of sums up Lenny as well. So I just kind of, not only was it a comfort to her, that book, but it was also a little bit, reminiscent of her journey as well.
And then Friends is also a comfort to her, because they fill her life. The show itself.
Yeah, they fill her life. And so I don't think it's a spoiler to say, so Lenny plays Scrabble by herself, but quite often pretends she's playing against Monica, because she's the one that would be the most competitive of the friends. Anybody that's watched Friends would know that. But that's how my gran would play Scrabble. So there's something I pinched from somewhere.
Oh,
so
really?
My gran, lived by herself, but she would set up the 2 decks of Scrabble, not with Monica.
I was going to say, does she have a character on the other side?
I've actually not checked. I should ask Granny if she ever named the other person, but she'd set up the couple of different tile decks, and I never knew how she did it, because you'd want to rip the other hand off.
Yeah.
Oh, they've got the X, so I'm going to make sure I take that triple letter score. But that's also where I got my love of Scrabble from, my gran. So we'd go, and she lived in a granny flat in our backyard for a while, so we'd trundle up there and probably bother the hell out of her, but she got a Scrabble game out of it most of the time. So that was also why one of the things Lenny does to bond with characters in the book is like the offering of the Scrabble, and likewise it came to her. That's very much based on just an element of my childhood. I think I just went way off track and didn't answer your question then, but there's a little.
That's all right. But it's interesting to see how a book comes together, and the different pieces that you steal from real life. And I'm impossible in a cafe. I'm the most nosy person on earth. I listen to every conversation. It means I'm useless at writing in a cafe. Because
there's one not far from me that would be ideal to set up, because when I sat there the other day, the tables were so close together. I was actually sitting I was closer to the person at the next table than I was to my friend across the table from me. And I thought, this is a bit uncomfortable, but then I was like, oh, what's happening over here? What's happening over here?
And your friends went, hello.
Yeah, maybe we should go out for a coffee together and we can ignore each other.
Just listen. That's a great idea. Did you have another character other than Lenny that you enjoyed writing in this book?
Like, I was quite fond of most of them. Definitely, and I don't know how you felt writing your book, but the supporting cast, when you just throw somebody in there and then they take on a bit of a life of their own, because you go, like Ned in the supermarket was just Ned in the supermarket.
Oh, really? And then he progressed.
And then he progressed. I'm like, oh, I know what I'll do with him. And he was modeled on a friend of mine's boyfriend who was like this, mad about, pop culture and memorabilia. So is my husband, by the way, like stuff in our house that I would happily sell on eBay if he wasn't looking, but I won't. He assures me it'll all be worth a fortune one day, but I'm inclined to not so much agree with that. But yeah, so that sort of thing, and that sort of burly, big, but really friendly bloke who's just everybody's friend. He was really fun to write. He was a really nice character, but also Faye. I loved writing Faye.
I did too.
And to the point where, not so much because of character, but I loved her and her name so much so we had twins 6 months ago. So one of my daughters is Harriet Faye, because I loved the name so much I wanted to use it. So Harriet Faye, and Faye also has a couple of, like, she wears big bright t-shirts all the time, and I kind of imagine her as this big bosomed woman who would just.
So Faye is the foster mother.
Faye is the foster mother, yes. It's probably a bit out of context for anybody that hasn't read it. But so Faye is Lenny Mark's foster mother, and that's
And you learn that very early in the story. So that's
not a spoiler, and not a spoiler either, that it was a happy home for Lenny. So that was nice to write because, yeah, Faye's just got this big, huge heart. But her bright T-shirts is very much based on my friend who is well in her 50s and cannot walk past an anime or a Disney T-shirt without buying it and wearing it proudly anywhere. And I just think, I didn't know they made these things for adults, and they do.
in that side.
Yeah, and she pulls it off, and
I'm
it's
getting
just
the feeling that anyone that enters your life is fodder for.
yeah, come on, you'd be the same, wouldn't you? You probably
I am the same, totally, 100%. In fact, I've got to the point where I warn people.
Oh, I like that about
I'm
you.
a writer.
And
I'm with a warning now.
Yeah, the wife of this friend who wears the T-shirt, she sent me a message the other day saying, I've got a new quirk for you, because she's been reading the book because her wife had done something a bit funny, and she said, I've got a new quirk for your next book. You can put this in. I'm like, oh, it's not as fun when I don't steal it.
If it's given to steal it. That's the joy of it, isn't it? And whether, but of course, no, that's not based on anybody.
That's not you at all. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the kind of relationship explored between Lenny and Ned.
Yep.
And you've just said that that wasn't part of your plan initially, like he was just a store clerk.
Yep.
And it's an interesting subplot. Why did you just decide to include that in the story?
I think so. Originally, I certainly didn't want it to be a love story, and I certainly didn't want it to be that a bloke comes along and saves the day. I didn't want Ned to be, which is funny because his surname's McKnight, Ned McKnight, to be a knight in shining armour.
I did pick up on that. I quite liked that.
Ned, not McKnight. So I didn't want him to come along and save the day, but it was also, as the story progressed, and what are we all looking for in life, or most of us? Connections and companionship. And you don't need a husband or a wife or a partner in your life to make it work or perfect or to be happy. But it was something Lenny hadn't really explored. So I wanted her to have that opportunity to explore it. So yeah, that sort of, can't give spoilers away about that either. But
there was an opportunity to reveal more about her character.
It was, and it was very much just more than for any sort of romance. It was just a bit of an opportunity for character growth, because it showed where she was at in relation to who she was letting into her life and in what format. Because it is a big step if you've shied away from romantic relationships, especially if it's a trauma-based thing that you do. It certainly is a big step to let somebody into that realm, because there's a very good chance that person's going to hurt you again. I think it showed she felt like she was in a much safer place and more secure in herself as well, which I think as we all trundle along into our 30s especially for me, as I got later in my 30s, you get to know yourself better, know what you do and you don't like. You don't put up with as much crap, because I don't know about you, but I think back now and it's all been a learning experience and got me to exactly where I needed to be. But God, I put up with some crap over the years.
Yeah. As does Lenny in the beginnings of the novel. And that idea of wanting to befriend certain people who she thinks they are, as opposed to noticing the amazing people that are right near her. It's quite interesting. Right. I loved that part of the story.
Yeah. And so my daughter's just started primary school, and I probably need to mention to her prep teacher, or foundation. They call it foundation there, but apparently prep's still okay, that it's not based on any real life prep teachers. I know, because it may be a little bit not complimentary. So mention that to her, because they are just, prep teachers are very special people, like the way they
just because they're great characters, because we've all met them, those characters, that Amy and Ashley, isn't it?
Yes, I'm glad my daughter does not have them as prep teachers.
Yes, definitely. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So there are numerous themes in your novel. I particularly love the way you explored loneliness and anxiety and trauma and happiness. What is happiness? And I really love getting a life. Okay. That whole concept of get a life.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all heard that at some point in our lives.
Yeah, we've probably all been told or issued that statement to somebody else. It's probably not very nice, but it is meant in a nice way, when Faye gives her that ultimatum.
Lenny needs that nudge, doesn't she? Like to
Definitely
start creating her life, because she's closed herself off from pretty much everything except the school children.
Yes.
That she adores working with. But so did all those themes, the anxiety, the loneliness, getting a life, all that, did you plan to have them throughout the book from the beginning? or did they just evolve?
I think themes are hard because I think when you look back and you go, oh, I like that I had really strong female characters in there.
Yep.
I didn't necessarily set out to do that. And I think likewise with those themes, I've suffered from anxiety and take medication for it. That's helped me really well in the last few years. So it was something that I did intend to have in there because not only having firsthand experience with it, but also because it's not something to be ashamed of. There's a
No.
lot on in life and the world, and some of us just need a bit of other skills and tools to deal with that. So I definitely be that in there, but also that she hadn't ever addressed it. So she couldn't get the coping mechanisms because she wouldn't admit that there was actually something going on. There's also she's of the mind that there's nothing wrong with me. I've always had a roof over my head and I've always been fed.
Which is an interesting trauma response, that, because there's quite a few people that do respond with that, or other people have it much worse than I do.
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah. Which I guess is good because unfortunately there's always going to be somebody that has it worse no matter what's happened to you. So I guess in a way it's a good perspective to have, but then it's also a bit dismissive because you've got to look after yourself and you've got to tackle what's going on in your life. So there is.
Because it very much halted her life that she wasn't dealing with, or parts of her life. Obviously, career was going okay, but.
Yeah. But then I guess for a lot of people, you need to work. Most people do because you need an income. So you can very much function for a set period of hours in a routine without giving sort of the game away, and then very much go home and collapse into pieces or just not deal with it when you're not around people. So I think that's really interesting that what you're from people and then what happens when they get home or behind closed doors is very different. And I think to some extent that's fair enough, because if you're at work, you need a professional. You've got to have a certain demeanour and you've got to have a certain conduct and professionalism about yourself. But I also think it's all right to let people in and tell them that you're not okay and share these problems with people. And so, yeah, I did want to explore that just all these things you can run. I guess Lenny ran on this head in the sand, just get on with it. Your problems aren't so big. And she did it for so long, but it was a slow drip into the bucket. So at some point that bucket was going to be full, and that bucket tipped over. And there was also a few other catalysts, obviously, with the letter from the parole board and meeting her neighbour and that sort of thing. So some other things were at play, and she really was coming together. Interestingly, one of the titles that popped up for the book was Lenny Marks Gets a Life, because that theme of it. But there is another book. I think we pushed that one because there's another book, Get a Life, Chloe Brown or something. That it was a little bit too similar. But I did that because it was very much a huge theme of the book. And actually, interestingly, it was never that direct from Faye. She never said, go and get a life. It was just that's the sort of the literal translation. That
Lenny's interpretation of.
Yeah. Her interpretation of it. And it's probably a fair interpretation. It's what she meant. She just didn't. She
probably did more gently, though, knowing Faye. She's
did more gently with a hug and some melting moments. Yeah.
Made me hungry when I read about them. So let's move on to research. Did you do any research for this book?
Yes, I did, because also saying no sounds really, really remiss of me not to. But I actually didn't think I did that much because the crime stuff I had a bit of an idea about anyway. But yeah, there was a bit of research. There a couple of the psychological aspects of it I did, and that was one of the things that changed when it got in the hands of an editor. They wanted it to be a bit less vague, so a bit more. I didn't tackle it head on. I'd done the research. I'm like, okay, people do forget things, and trauma-based responses do mean people shut down some things, but not other things. So I knew that it was possible, but I didn't at first, I couldn't get it on without dumping everything onto the page.
That's why I asked, because I'm really interested in how people take research, or put it in their book, but don't do an info dump.
Yeah, and hopefully that's not the way it came across even in the rewrite, because I think when I first did it, she had a lot more. So before it even got in the hands of an editor in version 367 or something, I sent it out. I don't know, and I was bad with version control. So I have no idea how many drafts I did in the end, but it was a lot more to do with her psychologist. She had a fair bit of ongoing help, and we were part of those meetings. And then I decided that not only was I not a psychologist, and it was going to be a bit heavy on, I didn't want to have to put it in the hands of a psychologist, and I thought it's a bit irresponsible to suggest you can have a couple of meetings and shrug that off. And then I also went, that's actually, I still felt like it was a private thing. I thought it was a behind doors thing. And it also wasn't the most important thing that helped Lenny. Which I won't dive into, but there is something that she credits very much with taking this huge weight off her shoulders by the end of the book. So I did do the research, so I know more about it than I put in the book, but then I'd put very little in the book. So I had to make it less vague in the end. The editors suggested that we needed just to explain it a little bit more. And it could be in the end like when I read crime books and I read them and I go, that's not the way it's done, or that
Haven't written one report.
yeah, exactly. I know. How did they read The Office? Well, after that shootout they were in yesterday, surely they're still doing paperwork. So if a psychologist picks it up, and I know the lovely Kylie Ladd, whose book I've got around here somewhere, I think she's a neuropsychologist. She's an overachiever.
Fabulous author.
Yeah, exactly. And love and funny and swam the Portsea pub or whatever. I'm like, just stop it, calm down. She might read it and go, that can't happen. That's not the way it happens. And that's very possible. But I based it in enough research. I thought that it was probable. And then whether or not it's happening on a regular basis, I don't know. But it is fiction. And
That's exactly what I was going to say. And that's the same with police procedurals, isn't it? You tried to write one that was accurate and it was perhaps not as entertaining as you might hope it would be.
Yeah, and that's it. When I read a book, I really have to put my reader's hat on because I can look at it and go, oh, that's a bit silly. And then just get on with it. And I wouldn't read them if they were based completely in reality because where's the enjoyment in that? Yeah, there's very much a market for crime books as based with a bit more. Actually, well, would you call yours a police procedural?
No, not at all.
Another, you've got a lot more of a police aspect to it, but it's from somebody else's point of view.
But it's from an everyday person point of view.
Yes.
And it's the same with my next one. I don't want to write from a police point of view. I just want to write from the perspective of a person dealing with the police and dealing with crimes. And so any assumptions she makes about things doesn't necessarily have to be accurate.
Yes, and then it can be based in what the general public probably thinks. And I do an everyday story and I did get that through yours as well. This is a very much an everyday person. And we're finding out this whole other element to their lives. So who knows how many people are living out there on the run from the IRA? Who knows?
So your work in policing, did it inform the novel, do you think? Or did it make it harder?
I think for this, it informed it because there were a couple of things in it that I just knew to be the case. And also they weren't, unfortunately, all that outlandish to me in respect to things to do with family violence or just people living with, I want to say background in crime, but
trauma, a traumatic trauma.
I'm always reluctant to use the word that they were a victim of something because victim sometimes, and I'm very lucky in the respect that I haven't had any serious crimes committed against me other than the odd scuffle as a police officer, which still isn't fun. But the victim implies that might not be a word that everybody's happy with. So yeah, something a bit nicer than that. Yeah, with a trauma background.
Okay, so why should readers get a copy of Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder? What do you want them to take away from the book?
Look, hopefully this doesn't put anyone off. It's not a how-to guide. So if planning on offering anyone in the future, this probably isn't going to inform it. But I think ultimately, and as you mentioned, did you mention this? Maybe somebody else told me. I don't know. I've heard so many nice things today on launch day that it is ultimately a heartwarming book. So it's got murder in the title, so you don't usually attach heartwarming to it. I do think Lenny Marks is a character I'm going to take a long time to get over because I love her. My 5-year-old says Lenny Marks all the time as if she's a person living in my house. I think that she probably go one of two ways. She'll either endear herself to you or you'll want to slap her a little bit. But I think most people will have a bit of a soft spot for Lenny Marks. So I think ultimately, if you want to read a book, and I like to walk away from a book feeling a bit better for reading it. And I think that's ultimately what this book has for readers. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yes. Send me Instagram messages if you read it and want to let me know. I like hearing nice things about my book. It's really good.
What's Instagram handle so people know?
KCM Wright.
Okay, there we are. So you've heard it. If you read it, tell her what you think.
If it's nice. Yeah. Which it will be. We'll
Um,
carry it on that.
So you mentioned before that you wrote a lot as a child, like through school, and then you didn't write again, and then you came back to it with book club. Is that correct? When
Yeah.
Sally,
Yeah.
did she issue you some kind of like ultimatum or something about writing? Did I read that somewhere?
Yeah, so it's actually in my acknowledgements that she didn't, but she did in my mind. So and apparently it's something that authors get a bit sick of hearing people saying, oh, I would have loved to write a book, or, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. You've probably heard it many times. I'm not far enough down the road yet for me to have heard it, but I said that to her and she said, just write one. And that it was just a throwaway comment probably to her. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll write one.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. And there I was sitting there with my first baby thinking, but how do I ever have free hands? Because, you've got one baby and you think you're the busiest you will ever possibly be. Little did I know. Yeah. So that's kind of where it all kicked off again. So maybe 5 years ago we're talking. Yeah. And with a unintentional ultimatum. But I think she'd accept that too. If I said to her, this was because you unwittingly challenged me, she'd probably just go, she's got a good sense of humour. She'd probably go, yeah, that's right.
She's got a
Yeah.
fabulous sense of humour.
Yeah.
So, did you always write fiction? Was it always crime based when you were a teenager, when you were writing back then?
No, I hope none of them still exist. Because they'd be just really embarrassing. And my mum still lives in the same house we lived in as kids. So I'm tipping in a cupboard somewhere, probably some pages that I'd written and all handwritten too. So everything was, handwritten. That a lot of mine revolved around teenage romance. And that was probably largely because I didn't have a boyfriend and thinking about kissing a boy or getting a boyfriend was about the most amazing thing I could think of happening to me at the time. So largely things were very well based on really nice guys meeting the sort of the dorky bookish girl and loving them. Fun, like,
We've all written one like that.
oh, yes. So, and I do remember, and this is probably a really good reflection on how good it was as a high schooler. There was a couple of other girls that loved writing stories and we gave them to our friends to read and they judged them in a couple of ways. And one was like best story. I don't know what the other ones were, but there was definitely a best and there was definitely a longest. Mine only won longest. Potentially.
Needed an editor. You needed someone to slash and burn a couple thousand words.
I did. I needed a good editor. Obviously, I could rabbit on about teenagers making out very well, despite having no first-hand knowledge of that.
That goes back to that observation thing again.
Doesn't it? I know, just stealing other people's story. It's all a bit creepy, isn't it? Just watching it. But anyway, look, it's paid off being a bit of a book nerd over the years. But yeah, always read. But yeah, that sort of period between, I guess, high school and then like I travelled a bit. And I was just busy working and probably kissing a few boys in there too, which was nice for a change because I didn't think probably at some point it would ever happen. And then, don't tell my husband that if you're listening, Gary.
No.
You were, no, that'd be weird if you're my first kiss at 35, probably. Yeah. Probably don't want. Yeah.
I think he can accept it, maybe.
Yeah, just did other things and then got back to it. But I've always read, I've always devoured books. I guess all those years in the meantime, just studying unwittingly.
Yes,
Yeah.
not realising you were doing it, which is, big part of what reading, doesn't it? So tell us about your journey to publication. You wrote the initial draft or however many versions of the initial draft. Then what happened?
Yeah, so the police procedural I wrote, I did actually submit it. I put it out on submission. So I finished that and I tweaked it and I gave it to my friends and they're all lovely and they all said, this is good and that sort of thing. And I'd done a lot of research because I get quite focused on things. So I listened to a lot of podcasts and I went to author events and they'd talk about their publication journey and I'd sit up and I'd be like, okay, how does this happen? And then I could follow that exactly to that. So that book went
Only there was a formula, right?
Exactly right. I know. Finally, you just, and it is a weird industry like that, just to get off track, where it is so subjective that the day Penguin came back to me and said, we want Lenny Marks and this is our offer, I got a rejection from an agent on the same day for the same book. You've just got to put your faith in that if it falls into the right hands and somebody loves it, then you're off and running. So I learned a lot about, as much as I laugh about the police procedural, that's essentially an autobiography. Although she was a much better police officer than me. She solved
Everything.
everything, and did her paperwork on time. But yeah, so that taught me everything about the submission, or a lot about the submissions process. So I was submitting to agents overseas largely. And then I did a couple of the open calls for manuscripts for, I think, a firm press still does one, and a couple of Australian based ones. And as well as a couple of competitions, like the Premier's published manuscript one in Victoria. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, all essentially a big no. I got a couple of manuscript requests, so I understood that process then, that you send it on your manuscript, and that was all really thrilling. So I think my query probably read a lot more entertaining than my book. Say this because one day somebody might say, we want to read that, we're going to pick it up and publish it, and I told everybody how boring it is. It's a great read. Great read. It's the best you'll ever read, police procedural wise.
Robotham talks about how the greatest ever Australian novel is in the bottom drawer of and everyone keeps wanting to publish it. And he's like, no, while it stays there, it's the greatest ever novel.
Absolutely. And is what I've got. That's my first book, greatest ever, but it's in the drawer. And then I wrote Lenny, polishing, and the lovely Sally Hepworth again, honestly, is not only a very good writer and funny as well. She is so generous with her time, and she has been so lovely to me, and I'll stop gushing about her, but she's just a very nice person. But so is the book community. I found
I was going to say, I think the writing community is quite extraordinary in Australia, and especially in crime, but people are just generous.
aren't they? And with their time, like that's times at a premium, and people are helping. But anyway, long story short, she said, could you read my unpublished manuscript for the next book? Which is always like a thrill to be asked. Like, how cool. Okay, Sally, I'd hate to read your unpublished book. I'd just give her some feedback on the crime stuff. If I can do anything for you, let me know. Do you want me to read your book? Because she knew I was writing. And I'm like, I would love you to read my book if you're offering, because I never would have asked. Because, I can only imagine, and I'm sure you've had this, where people want to send you their books. And it's also a really loaded request. Like, what do you do if your friend sends you a book and then you have to go, I would like your ongoing help with my police references in my story, but your story is shit. That's really hard, isn't it? So I sent it to her anyway, and she came back, gave me some feedback on it, but she said, I'd also like to show it to my Australian editor. Would you mind? Of course, I wouldn't mind. She did that.
Again, incredibly generous, yes.
Very generous. She did that, and then that went a little way through their process, but it was ultimately a no, and that was fine, because it was nice to have somebody pick it up and not laugh at me, which has never happened. I don't know if that's happened to anyone, but you always think somebody will. Yep. And then the lovely Lisa Ireland, who I'd done a group mentoring with, and I'd met her through Sally, and also when she wrote The Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan, she asked a couple of questions just about police in the country, and with Shirley and Frank on the run and that sort of thing. So I knew her through that, did a group mentoring with her, and she got wind of my book. And then for her group mentoring, which was fantastic, by the way, she's got so much information and very smart and very talented writer. Yeah. She said, can I send your book to my editor? Who says no to that, honestly? Yeah. Can I send your manuscript on to my editor at Penguin in case they want to publish it? Oh, no, please don't. Stop. So she sent it to the lovely Bev Cousins at Penguin, and she came back to me a bit later and said, we love your book and we're taking it through our acquisitions meeting. And I thought, it's still going to fall apart here. There's so many books out there. And they picked it up and haven't yet taken it back. And I believe bookshops
now. They've got to put them out there. They're on the shelves at the bookstores.
There's a big stack of them at Big W that my sister saw on the weekend. They're going to have trouble collecting all them. So I think it's a done deal. Stop pitching my but that's the road. So it was a little bit unconventional, but I was very lucky it fell into the right hands. But then it was also, there was a bit of work behind the luck as well.
Yeah, I think that's often the case. There is a lot of, you've got to do the rewriting, you've got to take on the feedback you get, and you've got to be able to prove you can do that as well. On that note, how did you find the editing process once you were in-house at Penguin?
I'm sure some people like it, but I liked it because I think I work in an occupation where things are you come across different jobs all the time out on the road and that sort of thing. There is a process you apply to things. So there's sort of an overlay of this is what you do and this is how you do it. And so that to me was editing. This is what we want you to do to this. And I'm like, great, guidance, direction, that's all I need. And I was quite happy to do it. I was lucky in the way that there wasn't a huge structural edit to it. There was a slightly different ending and a whole character that I took out, and so unwove that plot, because obviously with to pull out all those stitches. But other than that, there was a few things. And then you realize you've named people Robert, Robin, Robert. I don't know why you don't notice these things when you read them.
I did the same thing in my first book. So with my second, I actually wrote out the alphabet and crossed out the letters as I used them.
I just did that the other day. I needed a name. I went through all the letters and I had 5 letters left. And I'm like, what do I like starting with a W or a V or an X? Like
Xavier.
Xavier needs a Xavier in it. So yes, just those sort of things. And it's so funny that in rewriting and rewriting, which is why it's so good to get somebody else's eyes on it, you miss those things. You Robert, you Rob, you Robin, or repeat of words, like the repetition and not for artistic effect. I think, how did I not see this when I've read this 47 times? Yeah.
It's astonishing, isn't it, when it gets pointed out to you, that stuff.
Exactly.
During the whole process, what was the biggest kind of curveball you were sent? Like any of the publishing process?
A bad curveball or a good curveball?
Oh, just something that you really had to, it challenged you. You had to work on it.
Oh, actually, probably in the first round of editing, because the character that I took out, it created a different twist at the end of the story. So that was probably the first curveball, in that they loved it, they were happy, they'd picked up the book. So it wasn't a revise and a rewrite and send back in and hope for the best, because then you'd cut out anything they wanted, I would imagine. Like you'd just the bits, change any name you wanted. So there was probably that, taking that character out. And that was when I don't know if Lisa Island knows that after doing her group mentoring course, I've taken on board that she'll be my mentor for life. So I still email her. And
not a bad mentor to have, that one.
I know, extra things. And she still replies to me, bless her. But like the mentoring, the actual group has run out, but I'm still using it. She should have charged so much more for that course. And she said, look, sometimes you've got to trust that a good editor. And I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. And she knows what she's talking about. It's not her first rodeo like it is mine. Chopped it out. And I think the book's all the better for it. Oh, the other curveball probably was the title, because it wasn't originally named this. And I didn't like this title.
Right.
I love it now. And I'm so glad it's named that, because I think it's a real attention grabber. You want to set it apart. But at the time, I just thought, oh, this sounds terrible. A police officer writing about somebody getting away with murder. People are going to think I'm giving away secrets. Or what if my bosses get wind of it and they think, oh, gosh, what has she done here?
Written a manual.
Look, I don't know how to get away with murder, firstly. Let me qualify that. And that's not the end of things I've ever worked on. And I've never worked at the homicide squad. They certainly know a lot more about it than me. It's also fiction.
Again.
But yeah, I love the title. But yeah, it took a second round. So I said no. And then she came back to me a while later after we'd settled on an in-between title, which I think was the Lenny Marks and the Almost Truth, or the Almost Truths of Lenny Marks, which was very similar to my original title. And then came back and said, look, we just think it lacks a bit of punch. So we're going back to this title. What do you think? Can we go with it? And I was so heavily pregnant with things. And that in my acknowledgements, I refer to her metaphorically bludgeoning me. And it was in respect to the title. She apologized for bludgeoning me metaphorically, but I'm glad she did.
Yes.
And I really think I think it packs a punch.
It is interesting as a writer when you're handing over your baby, it then becomes a collaborative process, doesn't it?
Yep.
And that's what you don't necessarily realize when you first get into writing. I certainly didn't, that it's a collaborative thing. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because I've seen on your socials that you had baby in your arms and you were typing away. So are you working on a second novel?
I am definitely working on a second novel, which, thank God for TV for the older ones.
I was going to say, how on earth do you do it? 4 kids under 5. But yeah.
Look, it's just been such a good, there's a story like in me that wants to spill out too, because I did have a little bit of a break, because I wasn't, the end of my twin pregnancy, I wasn't super well. I had really high blood pressure and a few complications going on. So I just couldn't do anything. Like I was just useless, because in my head, I'm like, I'll be on maternity leave already. Think of the words I can count, like the best laid plans. So yes, we are lucky that they do sometimes sleep together. As in, we'll put them down for a nap and they will sleep at the same time. And I have just there's never going to be the perfect writing situation for me. I think most writers know that, whether you have kids or not, whatever you're doing, because emails pop up. You're so easy to be disturbed. The postie pops to the door or whatever. A friend rings with a crisis. So you just have to carve out the time, be a bit, I guess it's selfish, but be a bit selfish and make the most of it. It's a little pocket of 15 minutes. I'll take it. And I can, for a first draft, I can really get the words out. Like I'll just spew them out. I'm not saying that's the way it's going to look. It's certainly not going to look that way. I've got 267 drafts to go, unless my editor's listening, and then it's in really good shape and it'll be ready as you want it. But yeah, I have a new idea. It's still a bit crime adjacent and a bit quirky, hopefully. So similar sort of vibe. So yeah, but it's not a sequel either. So hopefully I can create another character that even I like as much as Lenny Marks, because that's
Challenge,
important.
but I'm sure you're up to it. It'd be remiss of me to not ask two of Pam's favourite questions for writers.
Sure.
So firstly, what is at the heart of your writing?
What is at the heart of my writing? Oh, that's a good question. I would say people and connections. I really enjoy learning about people and where they come from, how they got to where they were, why they are doing the things they're doing. And so I really like reading books about that, and I like writing about that.
Okay. And the other one is, finally, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? If any.
I love giving advice, even if I'm not qualified to give it. So I'll give it in just about any topic you like, whether it be something I know about or not. I've always got 2 cents to throw in. I'm certainly no expert. I've written a book. I'm very lucky that it's fallen into all the right hands. All I would say is keep writing, because the difference between, like I said, on the same day, Penguin said, we'll take it. An agent said, we've sent your email straight to the delete box. It's all really subjective. Yeah, so just keep reading, keep writing, and the best thing you can do is finish your book, because otherwise there's nothing there to even try and submit out in the world. That's my best advice.
Okay. I so enjoyed chatting with you, Kerryn. Thanks for sharing so much with us. Huge congratulations on Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder. And I can't wait to meet the character of book 2 when it comes out.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your book too as well. I will be picking that up as soon as I can get my hands on it.
April 5th. Dying to know. But thank you. I really did enjoy talking to you.
Thank you, Rae. I appreciate it.